Wow. 2022 might just be the craziest year for animation I've ever experienced. And I don't mean craziness in terms of being super good or super bad. Because after almost 2 years of this medium being confined to the streaming world, this year offered up so much variety from different studios and filmmakers, and also Ice Age 6, but I digress. As of right now, this is my favorite year for animation of the 2020s by a landslide. It's not the best, but it's my favorite. I just felt so alive finally getting back to watching these movies on the big screen, watching animation studios start to find their footing again, watching one of the best filmmakers of our time make his way into the medium, watching DreamWorks give us one of the greatest achievements in the history of mankind. In spite of the inevitable hiccups, this year truly felt like no other, and I found the time to watch a total of 20 animated movies over the course of this year. So I figured I'd take the time to rank them all. Obviously, I wasn't able to watch everything that came out this year, so if you do have anything I might like that's not on this list, let me know any recommendations that you have for me in the comments. Also, since I know I'm gonna get asked about this, I really wanted to watch the new Puss in Boots movie for this video, but I wanted to make sure that I got it out by the end of the year, so I'll give it its own separate video in a week or two and let you guys know where it falls on the list there. We've got a long journey ahead of us, minnows, so let's get started. Ice Age 6. You know, I initially wrote a gigantic rant about this movie and how disrespectful it was of Disney to try and milk off of this franchise right after Blue Sky got shut down by them. Honestly, I just don't have the energy at this point. I could talk about how asinine the entire plot of this movie is, where stuff just happens at random with no connective tissue whatsoever. I could talk about all the continuity errors and plot holes that come with this movie taking place right after Ice Age 3. I could talk about how the old characters are either annoying or shells with their former selves. I could talk about how this movie introduces equally obnoxious new characters. I could talk about how this entire movie causes me physical pain to look at. I'm not even joking, this movie makes Shark Tale look like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse in terms of its visuals. Let that sink in. But let's be honest, you don't need me to tell you any of that stuff. It's honestly sad to see how this franchise has been run into the ground, but I unfortunately can't really say I'm surprised. The good news is that just like Ice Ages 4 and 5, I can completely ignore its existence and not miss out on anything. Congrats, Disney, you made one of the most pointless sequels of all time. Kung Fu Panda. Oh my gosh, Paws of Fury was so bad. I've said previously how I don't mind films using pre-existing ideas, but there's a very fine line between being derivative and straight up copying. And if you thought this movie was a ripoff based on the trailers, then you could not be more right. Our hero has to save the day even though nobody thinks he can because he's a different species, and the master is grumpy and doesn't like him, but then he realizes he was wrong and they train and they defeat the bad guy and they all live happily ever after. Okay, is there anything good in this movie? I mean, I like the animation in the opening credits. Actually, this whole movie doesn't look all that bad, TBH, and sometimes there's some pretty neat moments with the action sequences. Surprisingly enough, the fact that they're animals somewhat plays a bearing on the plot. Michelle Yeoh is in this movie, and she's pretty good as always, though something's a little suspicious about her doing 4 kung fu-related movies in a row. But I digress. It doesn't even bother to take the story it tells seriously, mostly due to its abysmal sense of humor. On top of having the terrible gross out stuff that comes in most kids' movies, we also have the fourth wall breaks. Every 10 minutes or so, we have characters acknowledging the background music, credits, title cards, and it's just exhausting. These kinds of jokes don't work when they only exist as a cover-up for bad writing. They're shoved in at the most inappropriate moments too, which sabotage potentially emotional scenes. Like when the Catmaster is talking about his sad backstory and Hank the dog talks about the lighting. It made it so that I didn't care when the movie actually took time to be emotional. The messages about racism are also incredibly one-dimensional, and they're brought up in the most on-the-nose way possible. We have to have these side characters keep telling Hank that he can't be a samurai because he's a dog multiple times, and it makes their shift in attitude by the end feel incredibly disingenuous. This is why subtlety is important. It makes character growth and emotional reconciliations feel earned. I think the fact that this movie is so similar to another movie that I have a lot of fondness over is what really gets under my skin, but it's not even a good movie on its own. Its few redeeming elements truly can't make up for one of the laziest and instantly forgettable screenplays of the entire year. I'm sorry if I sound more negative than I usually am. The movies at the bottom of this list are just really bad. Diary of a Wimpy Kid Roderick Rules is never-ending pain and suffering. No, not that Roderick Rules, that one. I can't believe Disney even thought that it was a good idea to make their animated reboot into a franchise, but fortunately there were a few things here that barely make it better than the first one. There's a scene where Greg Heffley plays the Rick Roll song, and that was pretty funny actually. And the addition of Ed Asner as his grandfather was a very wholesome casting choice. Ed Asner, the same guy that played Carl in Up, that guy. Shame that this had to be his last movie, honestly. He deserved better. Yeah, that's about everything that I liked. This movie fails to be a good adaptation of the book so badly that it's laughable, with so many inaccuracies and removals that actively make the story worse. It's literally just addition by subtraction to the point where it becomes an unrecognizable pile of mush, devoid of anything in terms of personality that makes it feel hollow beyond all reason. It also throws in a couple of random details from other later books, which I guess they thought was something that they needed to do because of their target audience, and it really doesn't work. The animation universally looks like garbage, at least the 3D animation. There's a couple of 2D sequences that I thought looked decent, but it just made me wish that this was the style that they used for the full movie. But no, 2D animation's too old-fashioned for the elites. Let's just do 3D because that's the norm. But yeah, these characters still aren't expressive in the slightest, their movements are so stilted, and yet it still manages to look better than Ice Age 6. Seriously, how the f does a studio with this much money and resources make something this ugly? So embarrassing. The voice actors are also not doing that great of a job here.
Haha, I am not going crazy.
I can't tell if this is the fault of the dialogue or the delivery, but almost every single line is delivered without any semblance of emotion, which is probably a contributing factor to why I didn't laugh at any of the jokes besides the Rick Roll. And the emotional core is ultimately an indicator of how little this movie understands the book. Since when has Greg's desire ever been to impress Roderick? He just wants them to get along and have him stop picking on him. Never once in this film are they allowed to organically connect with each other though, and Greg is somehow less likable because he essentially blackmails Roderick into doing whatever the he wants him to do. It truly boggles my mind that Disney even thought that this was a good idea, since there was clearly no passion behind this lukewarm, tepid adaptation that offers nothing of worth to this franchise. Okay, that was the last movie on this list where I get angry, I promise. Let's keep going before I pop a blood vessel or something. DC League of Super Pets is not good. I reviewed it a few months ago and my thoughts haven't really changed all that much. I enjoyed some things like the guinea pig villain. She's super entertaining and has a chance to be evil for the entire film. The titular Super Pets were kind of a mixed bag as actual characters, but I like how this movie gets creative with how they use their powers. But that's where my praises end. I don't know how this movie expects us to get emotionally invested in Superman's bond with his dog, since he and the other Justice League members are played almost entirely for laughs, which I probably would have been okay with if their role in the story was reduced. Potentially interesting plot lines with the other animals are super weak and underdeveloped, and the main character is pretty agonizing to watch for the first half hour or so, which is owed equally to both the writing and The Rock's vocal performance. I don't think he suits this character at all. It just feels like he's doing his normal speaking voice, and it's not like he complements the character he's voicing like Mally.
This guy.
I think it's weird how I'd still consider this a net positive in comparison to a lot of DC's other films, but this one still just feels way too much like every modern kids movie. The writing, the comedy, the characters, and the fact that it's a DC movie kind of makes all these things just a little bit worse.
I love a good body swap. It's like demonic possession with the ones you love.
Hotel Transylvania, Transformania. Yep, that movie came out this year. Look, I don't think this is awful or even the worst movie in this franchise, but if this is what the endgame of these characters is, yeah, talk about underwhelming. I feel like the conflict of this movie could have worked better if it occurred earlier in the series, with Drac having to deal with Johnny being a screw-up despite somewhat accepting him as a human, but its current placement makes the way he treats him kind of douchey and undermines the character development he had in the original. He's literally responsible for nearly every single one of the movie's problems. Just tell Mavis you changed your mind about retiring, idiot. Whatever. This is also easily the least funny movie in the franchise. Like, there's a lot less painfully bad humor in this one, but I don't recall laughing at anything here. The only Hotel Transylvania movie to give me nothing to take away from it comedically. I'll at least give it credit for having a more airtight story than its predecessors. It was kind of cool to see the characters outside of their usual element now that they're human. And it does make Mavis and Erica much more entertaining characters. Brian holds a decent replacement for Dracula 2, but dare I say it, the Hotel Transylvania franchise has unfortunately fallen victim to Ice Age syndrome. Let the past die. Kill it if you have to.
Been on this island for so long that now she's imagining that squirrels can talk?
I still don't get the hype for Chip and Dale, y'all. The only thing that separates it from something like Wreck-It Ralph 2 or the Emoji Movie is the fact that it's meta, which I guess makes it a moderately more tolerable experience since it at least knows it's unfunny for the most part. But I don't know, something about all these cameos feels really distasteful, especially coming from Disney, and it makes the story feel kind of stretched out and not as good as I gave it credit for. Obviously, the references do tie into the villain's main plot, which honestly was kind of creative and fun, but there's absolutely nothing that justifies the degree that this movie has them. It has some decent satire regarding the animation industry, and seeing all the different styles blend into live action was pretty cool. It's definitely not soulless, something I haven't been able to say about a film like this in a while, but it does have a lot of the travesties that come with this kind of product placement in movies. But they pay tribute to the best animated franchise of all time, so I'm cool with its existence.
We must call this one lucky.
Putting aside my opinions on John Lasseter in real life, I didn't hate Luck as much as I expected. It was a mixed bag for me. The main character, Sam, has a really fun rapport with this black cat in spite of the trite nature of their relationship, and I was pretty invested in her struggle about having to navigate the world on her own for the first time. But most of this falls apart due to how detached I felt from their actual quest. There's some moderately okay world building in the actual land of Luck, but that's about as far as I can go with compliments. But like, I've seen way worse generic kids movies, though I do hope Skydance does eventually find its footing in the industry.
I'm gay, yeah.
It's so weird how I managed to get the amount of unironic enjoyment that I did with Minions 2. It really is that rare instance of Illumination defying the norms and giving us something that actually feels like a sequel and not a brand extension, especially in the context of this franchise. That being said, it's still got a ton of obvious problems. It's got cliched aspects of its screenplay, the story and pacing kind of stumble in a lot of places. The villains are pretty lame, most of the jokes and running gags with the minions are pretty lame, except for Otto. Yeah, this movie has a lot holding it back from being actually good, but I still think it's pretty fun. Aside from the typical shenanigans one would expect to come out of the minions, a lot of the jokes in here land pretty hard. The side characters are mostly pretty solid, and I especially like the bond between Gru and Wild Knuckles. His former teammates disowning him is a great parallel to Gru being told by his lifelong idols that he's not good enough. It's a really solid way of representing Gru's insecurities and others' perception of him, and how it's something that's impacted him since he was a kid. And his arc, where he realizes he doesn't need to work with the best of the best to be satisfied with his role as a villain, gives logic as to why he would keep the minions around for as long as he did. It complements the other films so naturally and does so much more to justify its existence, compared to the other three sequels. Not a masterpiece, but something I honestly wouldn't have a problem revisiting, which is a huge accomplishment by Illumination standards. And compared to their usual output, this is definitely a net positive for me. Otto, I would die for you. Strange World is weird, y'all. It's weird in terms of its premise, it's weird in terms of the execution of said premise, it's weird in terms of the marketing or lack thereof. Actually, that last part's not all that weird now that I think about it. You know, with the exception of Ralph Breaks the Internet, this might just be the weakest Disney movie from both this and the previous decade. And pretty much all the things I like about the movie, with the exception of the animation, are only good in a vacuum. The dynamic between the three generations of the Clade family is really interesting with their different perspectives based on their experiences. They have great chemistry with each other, and I feel like with a couple of tweaks with the script, it could be something that's capable of carrying an entire film. But no, instead we have to go on this lame-ass sci-fi journey with absolutely no tension until the last 20-something minutes. And I really want to emphasize that fact. This is the first Disney film I've seen in a while that never once feels like it has stakes. Not only are we never shown what the characters are even fighting for and simply told, but the quest itself lacks urgency with no real consistent threat that they're up against. It's just random perils that pop up in this location without structure. It makes the overall experience feel very tedious until, again, the last 20 minutes. And, oh boy, how do I explain this? Okay, so right when they get to the center of the world, which they think is killing off the energy source that they use, Ethan and Searcher have a falling out, and then it's revealed that the world they've been exploring is actually an unidentified beast's insides. and they've been living on top of the beast all this time. So now they have to destroy their main source of power, which is apparently killing the beast's insides, and the hometown seems to be doing fine without the power source that they've had all this time. Okay, so I'm gonna assume that this twist was meant to be a commentary on how the collection of natural resources comes at a cost or something, or maybe it's about everybody losing, which I guess was something that was foreshadowed.
I'm sorry, I'm confused as to the relationship here.
I don't even know what to make of this twist, honestly. The thing this movie has most going for it is the characters, but it prioritizes its story and world building above both of those things, making it into something that ends up not really saying anything at all. It's not like Disney hasn't been able to combine genres well before. This is coming from somebody whose favorite Disney movie of all time is Lilo and Stitch. The elements just don't blend together at all, and the high points of this film only barely make up for that. I guess I wouldn't have a problem rewatching it, but it'll hardly be my first choice if I'm in the mood to watch a sci-fi by Disney. It's got some good things going for it here and there, but the convolution of the story undercuts their strengths by quite a bit. Still, it's an indicator that Disney animation does have interest in variety, and as a result, I've still got some level of optimism for them this decade.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Rangers in space!
Even though Lightyear is definitely on the weaker end of Pixar's lineup, I've personally found it to be a bit overhated. It's a nice, simple, if a bit forgettable sci-fi adventure. I don't really know what else I can say about this film that I didn't already cover in my initial review. I still think the movie's pretty funny, even though Socks carries the humor of this film on broad shoulders. Chris Evans' vocal performance and the way Buzz is written in general really rub me the wrong way, but the side characters kind of make up for that. And I don't know, it's fine. The only offensively bad thing about this movie for me is Zurg, which I didn't go into before since I was trying to keep my thoughts spoiler free. He might just be the worst villain to come out of Disney or Pixar, for a lot of reasons. Sarcastic Horse already did an excellent video that pretty much sums up all my problems with him, so check it out, I'll link it in the description. Overall, this is a deeply flawed film, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy myself, even if it is a step down from the other Pixar films this decade. After over a decade's worth of waiting, we finally got another film from Henry Selick. I had so much anticipation for Wendell and Wild, not only because I love Coraline and The Nightmare Before Christmas, but the actual trailer looked really interesting and I was excited to see the direction that Selick would take here. And after checking it out, this movie has pieces of his handiwork for sure. The stop-motion animation is excellent as always. The characters are fantastic. Key and Peele are amazing in almost everything they're in, and it's no different here. And this is probably the most laugh-out-loud funny film of his. But damn, this movie's script is an absolute mess. You know how in my Blue Sky ranking where I said how Rio 2's scattershot plot stemmed from trying to balance too many stories at once, despite some of them being good on their own? It honestly felt like that. The movie is pretty vague with how the world of the demons works in this universe, and a lot of the directions that the plot chooses to go in an attempt to introduce new concepts and themes actively convolute a story that really has no reason being this messy. Don't get me wrong, this movie is nowhere near as awful as Rio 2. It has excellent animation and characters as you would expect from a Henry Selick film, but I really don't have any interest in checking it out again because of its story. I know a lot of people on animation Twitter really love this film, especially because of its representation. That's totally valid, and I definitely don't want to let my more mixed opinions on the film discourage you from giving it a watch. And hey, if this is the weak point of Henry Selick, I think that's pretty telling of how great of a filmmaker that he really is.
Mushroom Kingdom, here we come!
It's always nice to see 2D animation make its way back into the mainstream. I've never actually watched the Bob's Burger TV show, but after watching this movie, I think I want to check it out. It doesn't really feel like the other adult animation that I've seen. The characters are actually likable, and I really dig the humor. I think the mystery of the movie is mostly well handled, and it ties into the main conflict of the family having to get money in order to keep the restaurant afloat. Sometimes the pacing kind of halts during the scenes with the kids, and aside from the daughter with the pink hat, a lot of their subplots don't really add much to the story. Plus, the musical numbers are shoved in at really awkward intervals and have astoundingly low energy to them, as well as the final battle, which is really weirdly directed and way longer than it should be. Still, I had a lot of fun with this one, and I really hope the show's up to the same standards. It's not something I'm dying to rewatch, but it was still a ton of fun for me, and chances are it'll probably be the same for you. I was debating whether or not I should watch Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles because I hadn't seen the rebooted TV series that it was based on. Fortunately, a bunch of people on Twitter were saying that you didn't need to watch that specific show to enjoy this movie. So I checked it out and I liked it. You've got to give props to the writers for making this movie easily understandable for fans and normies alike. And that's just one piece of the puzzle here. The action and cinematography here are exceptional, once again shining a light on the near limitless power of 2D animation. On top of having really great designs for the main characters. I mean, look at how gigantic Ralph is in comparison to the others. Look at him, he's supposed to be 50. Anyways, speaking of characters, they're mostly pretty enjoyable. I do wish we could have gotten more of some of them though, especially Splinter. Leo in this is essentially just Sonic in his second movie, both in terms of his arc and personality. They've both got the same voice actor, so I feel like the writers wrote this character around that fact, but that's probably just a coincidence. The villains in this movie are also kind of forgettable, plus this movie's story involves time travel, and it's not handled the greatest here. It's pretty vague with how it works in this universe, and there's some stuff in the ending that's either anticlimactic or straight up doesn't make sense. But these things didn't hinder my experience too much. It's still a good time.
We're deep sea explorers. We discover rare sea creatures in our incredible submarine.
Sea Beast was one of my biggest surprises of the year. Part of that came from my increasing indifference towards anything Netflix related for a lot of reasons, but this movie managed to shatter my expectations by delivering a highly entertaining, well-animated pirate adventure. I was really impressed with this movie's opening act. It put so much effort into the mythology of the sea creatures, as well as having such beautiful locations and being placed on such a large scale. However, the actual story does get pretty derivative as it goes along, and I wouldn't mind as much if the characters were more compelling. I wish the main character in particular could have had a more interesting motivation for his worldview, compared to just following orders. The movie vaguely implies he feels tied to the captain being his father figure, but that relationship isn't given enough focus for it to be as effective. Still, this is a very entertaining movie. It's funny, it has stunning direction and animation, and there's a ton of creativity with the creature design, all of which culminate into a much more small-scale, hand-to-hand final battle. I didn't expect them to go that route, and I thought both this and the actual ending were the highlights of the film. It's like How to Train Your Dragon 3, but without the character assassination. In spite of its problems, I loved this movie, and I can't wait to check it out again.
I am Maymay.
I was really disappointed with Lightyear, fam. Pixar is my favorite film studio of all time, and I know that they're capable of so much more. If only there was another movie that they released this year that managed to reach the same emotional highs, the ambitious storytelling, the rich themes, the thing that allowed them to create some of my favorite movies ever made. If only we could have gotten another movie this year. Oh right, yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I've honestly really come around to turning right over the past few months, even though some of my original problems still stand. I don't think the movie's that funny. There's some serious tonal and pacing issues, especially in the final act. Some of the themes that are compelling in isolation don't feel all that earned in the context of this film, but this movie manages to suck me in each time I watch it. It has such a unique vibe compared to Pixar's other films, while also being my personal favorite looking film they've put out to date. It's a movie that thrives on its simplicity, giving us a chance to thoroughly invest ourselves in the characters. May has quickly become one of my favorite Pixar protagonists to date, and her journey of self-discovery throughout the movie is absolutely excellent. From the incredibly tight bond she has with her friends to the strain that she has to push through to finally connect with her mother. All of it contributing to her just finding her place in the world and coming into her own. I'm glad that so many people have been able to connect with this Pixar film in particular, in spite of people who've insisted that it's too narrow in its scope. I really hope that Domi Shi gets a chance to work on more projects. She's very talented, and while it has quite a bit from being one of Pixar's all-time greats, it still has a ton of the highs that have made so many of their other films stand the test of time.
She sells seashells on a seashore.
When I first started writing the script for this video, I didn't know if I was going to include Marcel the Shell with Shoes On for this list, but then the Academy announced that it was eligible for Best Animated Feature at the Oscars, and I figured, why not? This has got to be the most wholesome movie that I've seen all year, period. It's not super deep or compelling with its story, but it's got such a creative and unique setup. It's shot from the perspective of a man who's filming a documentary of Marcel's everyday life to put online. The direction and editing here are top notch, and I like how despite this being a live-action animated animation crossover, this movie actually focuses on the animated characters rather than the humans. And these characters are just so charming and lovable that it makes for such an engaging experience watching them vibe in this one location that's made to feel humongous. There's some cringy internet humor towards the opening that kind of breaks the atmosphere, but for the most part, this is another hit for A24 and well worth checking out if you haven't already.
I alone control the dragons.
My Father's Dragon is so fantastic. I'm a bit of a stranger to Cartoon Saloon's filmography with the exception of Wolfwalkers, which, by the way, is a 9 out of 10 masterpiece and one of my favorite animated movies of the decade. My Father's Dragon isn't as good, but it does have a very strong screenplay and is a little bit thematically richer. It covers a lot of heavy coming-of-age topics like dealing with change and facing fear, and I think it's strengthened by how strong the bond between the two main characters are. I think the vocal performances from Jacob Tremblay and Gaten the Stranger Things are really strong as well. The side characters are solid, there's some absolutely stunning visual sequences, the score is a real standout, it's such an easy, charming film to like. There's a good chunk of dumb, immature jokes from the titular dragon, and I wasn't as invested in him emotionally as I was with the main character. It makes the dramatic tonal shift in the final act almost jarring, but nothing super bad in this department, and the ending of the film mostly makes up for it. One thing that I was confused by as well is why we never get any information on the female narrator. You would think that since she was telling her father's story, we could have her show up in the ending or something. Maybe that's how it is in the book that I haven't read though, I don't know. These are mostly minor complaints though. I still really love this movie. I can't wait to check out the rest of Cartoon Saloon's films because the ones that I have seen from them are nearly everything I could have asked for out of animated cinema and more. Why don't you market your animated projects, Netflix? Be better than Disney. Be better.
People used to tell me that you were too selfish to be a great artist, and I used to defend you.
You know how a lot of people talk about how Spider-Verse changed animation for the better? It's movies like Intergalactic that are the perfect example of what they meant. This is a gorgeous looking movie that fully takes advantage of the fact that it's animated. It feels like a distant cousin to Spider-Verse in terms of its visual style, and don't think I mean that as an insult. I'd be lying if I said the story wasn't on par with the animation, but I still thought it was mostly well put together. It's a really charming romantic drama where the two leads have exceptional chemistry, and I enjoy the two of them coming together. It's nice to see an animated movie that feels much more adult-oriented than the stuff that we usually get in the mainstream. Maybe some of the edgy humor was a bit excessive towards the middle, but thankfully they toned it down by the end of the third act. And also, I wish the subtext about the art industry could have gotten a bit more focus. It would be in line with both of our two leads' struggles and triumphs as aspiring artists. Don't let these complaints get in the way of my recommendation though. I promise you don't want to miss this one. It's a film with stunning animation that contributes a ton to watching a beautiful love story come to life. I also highly recommend checking out my friend Olivia's video on the film. She goes into a lot of detail about the techniques used and the inspiration behind its animation. That link will also be in the description. I don't want to ever hear another person say Spider-Verse is overrated again. It's a masterpiece, you know it's a masterpiece, just accept it and move on.
You complete me.
Alright, let's get this out of the way real quick. Sorry, I really needed to get that out of my system or I was gonna explode. Now that that's out of the way, The Bad Guys is an actual fucking masterpiece. This might be one of my top 10 favorite DreamWorks films of all time. It contains one of the smartest and intricate scripts in any of their movies, period. Every single piece of the story connects so masterfully with so many clever subversions in the mix. Every single scene is animated beautifully. Wolf's transition from a villain to a hero is expertly crafted, and you buy the connection between him and Diane. I love how she's able to use her own shaky past to help him recognize how he should be good, not for recognition, but to become a better individual. And thanks to no small part to this influence and a journey of remorse and introspection, he and the other bad guys are able to become the best versions of themselves, while still maintaining the traits and personalities that make them so enduring. In spite of the familiar setup, the payoff of nearly every single scene and line of dialogue contributes so much to a consistently entertaining film that's gotten better with every single rewatch. Even Marmalade, despite the twist with him being pretty easy to guess, still works works as this movie's antagonist. He's like the perfected version of what they were going for with the villain in Zootopia. It's brilliant to have him use his moral status and the fact that he's a presumably innocent species to gain a tactical advantage over the heroes and briefly tear the team apart from the inside. And again, it's all done with such finesse and pizzazz that makes it so fresh and unlike anything I've seen from the studio. This movie has poorly paced elements of its plot and some stale jokes that hold it back from being perfect for me, but trust me when I say that these issues don't take away from an endlessly entertaining experience that I doubt I'll ever get tired of revisiting. I've been having my doubts about the future of DreamWorks animation in the past few years, but I'm so glad I stuck around long enough to get a masterpiece like this. It'll get its own video soon, don't worry. So with all that being said, I bet you're wondering, what animated movie came out this year that I think is better? Cue the music, y'all. It's time for number one. Yeah, chances are y'all knew who the number one spot was going to already. Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio is absolutely phenomenal. It takes this classic story we've seen so many times before and places focus on the undertones that haven't been depicted in any other adaptation before it. I think what really separates this one from the pack for me though is how much more I found myself connecting with the characters, which was a problem I neglected to mention about the Disney version. In this version, Geppetto is a perfectionist who's dealing with grief after the loss of his son during the war, and builds Pinocchio as a way of coping with this loss. But he resents him once he comes to life due to him not reaching the standards of his son Carlo due to his naivete about how the world works, before realizing the value he has just by being himself. It sets him up for exceptional growth throughout the story rather than him just being a plot device for Pinocchio to work around. On top of that, this movie places a lot of emphasis on what Pinocchio becoming a real boy means. This version makes it so that the spell that brings him to life means that he can't die, and ultimately has to deal with the reality of remaining immortal. It makes World War II in 1940s Italy being a framing device work extra well. He's taught the importance of good like in the original story, but there's now a much darker undercurrent to the nature of his character. Is his inability to die worth it despite everyone around him eventually passing on? It's very introspective and thought-provoking, and ultimately showcases how Del Toro pushes the thematic boundaries of the story and what the family-friendly genre can accomplish, by subverting the most familiar elements to strengthen what he wants to say with this story. It has so much to say about life, processing of negative emotions, the weight of expectations and how they impact the people around us. And in the end, it's beautiful to have all of Pinocchio's experience make him choose to become a real boy because he recognizes the beauty of it all, even after all the messiness and knowledge that it'll come to an end. And even beyond that, it's just a really charming retelling of the story. The characters are fantastic all around, there's a couple decent songs. The animation gives me so much life and solidified the timelessness of stop motion. It's one of Del Toro's best movies and easily the best Pinocchio adaptation put to screen. Yes, even better than the Disney version. The Bad Guys is my favorite animated movie of this year by quite a bit, the film that I'm undoubtedly the most passionate about, but I personally consider Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio to be the best of the year. If the Academy is willing to use their brain for once, this will easily take home Best Animated Feature at the Oscars this year, but regardless, let's hope this is only the beginning for Del Toro in the realm of animation.